You know, when you look at a political map of the world today, it is so easy to just to see those bold lines and distinct colors as permanent.
Oh, totally. Like
Right.
they've just always been there.
Right. You look at Europe, the Middle East, Asia, and you think you know exactly whose history belongs to which capital city. But today, we are going to peel back that map.
We really are.
Yeah. So we're welcoming you to a deep dive that is going to completely remap your understanding of global history. Our mission today is to trace the massive and honestly unexpected global footprint of Turkic-led rule by looking specifically at present-day national capitals.
It really is a paradigm shift when you look at the data. I mean, it forces you to realize that modern borders are incredibly recent inventions.
Hmm.
And, beneath them is this architecture of governance that shaped the modern world in ways we rarely acknowledge.
And to guide us through this, we have a really fascinating stack of sources in front of us. We are looking at a comprehensive, major existing cities under Turkic-led rule source compendium.
Yes, along with a working source table.
Exactly. And this table specifically details major existing cities and present-day capitals that were historically governed by Turkic, Turco-Mongol, or Ottoman ruling elites. We are talking about deep historical layers here, incredible durations of rule, and the specific types of governance that molded these urban centers.
But, before we go any further, we really need to set a baseline for you.
Good point.
Because when we use the term Turkic-led, we are not just talking about the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah.
And we certainly aren't just talking about the modern Republic of Turkey. The scope here is, well, it's so much broader.
Yeah, it really is.
We're including the Seljuks, the Mamluks, the Timurids, the Moguls, the Golden Horde, the Qajars, and various Turkmen confederations, too.
Right, because if someone says Roman, no one assumes you are only talking about the people currently living in the city of Rome, in Italy.
Exactly.
Roman influence, Roman architecture, Roman law, all of that stretched across continents. And in the exact same way, Turkic-led rule stretched far beyond modern Turkey. It created this massive, layered historical cake across the globe.
That is the perfect way to conceptualize it. And our sources are very careful to note that counting these years of rule is not a claim of complete demographic Turkification or ethnic replacement.
Right, it's not about erasing the locals.
Exactly. In many cases, these Turkic administrators coexisted with Arab, Persian, Greek, Slavic, or Indic urban cultures. It's really about who held the administrative, taxation, and military levers of power over the centuries.
Okay, let's unpack this. And I think the most intuitive place to start mapping this out is by looking at the core regions of Anatolia and the Middle East. Anatolia makes sense to people, but even there, the sheer unbroken timeline of governance is just staggering.
Yeah, Anatolia is definitely our clearest baseline for long-duration, direct imperial rule. Take Ankara, the current capital of Turkey.
Okay.
Our sources show over 800 years of continuous Turkic statehood there. It goes from the Seljuk Turks to local frontier lords into the Ottoman Empire and then seamlessly into the modern Republic of Turkey.
Wow.
Yeah, that is an unbroken chain of administrative DNA.
But then you move south, right, out of Anatolia and into the Levant and Iraq, and that unbroken chain turns into something much more complex. Like, look at Baghdad in Iraq.
Yes, Baghdad has over 560 aggregated years of Turkic-led rule, but it's segmented.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't just one dynasty holding on forever. Think of it like an operating system getting updated by different developers who share the same underlying code.
Ooh, I like that analogy.
You have the Seljuks from 1055 to 1152, then Turkmen confederations like the Karakoyunlu and Akoyunlu in the 1400s, and then the Ottoman Empire takes over from 1534 right up until the First World War with just a few interruptions.
And it's a similar story in the Levant, right? Damascus in Syria has a staggering 700-plus years of Turkic-led governance, shifting from the Seljuks and Zengids to the Mamluks and then to the Ottomans.
Yeah.
And Beirut in Lebanon follows a similar track with over 600 years if you include the Mamluk era leading into direct Ottoman provincial rule. Even down in Yemen, in Sana'a, you have about 46 years of effective, direct Ottoman capture and hold in the late 19th and early 20th centuries.
Yeah, the highlands there were notoriously difficult to control.
Right, so while they claimed it for longer, the actual functional governance was shorter.
But here's where we need to look at how these empires actually functioned. Because it wasn't just about sending a governor from a distant capital. Sometimes the Turkic-led rule emerged organically from within an entirely different cultural sphere.
Which brings us to Tehran, and I have to say, when I was reading through the compendium, this completely stopped me in my tracks.
I'm not surprised.
I mean, the capital of Iran, the table lists 131 to 139 years of Turkic origin rule there under the Qajar dynasty starting in 1786. Wait, I'm stuck on Tehran here. We think of Iran today as the ultimate center of Persian identity.
We do, yeah.
How did a Turkmen tribal dynasty manage to rule a Persian cultural powerhouse for over a century without being overthrown by the locals?
It is a brilliant question, and it really speaks to how sophisticated these power structures were. The Qajars were a dynasty of Turkmen tribal origin, but they didn't try to erase Persian culture. Instead, you see a historical symbiosis that happened all over the region. You have Persian administration and high culture seamlessly marrying with Turkic military and dynastic power.
Ah, I see.
So the Qajars utilized the existing Persian bureaucratic elite to run the state, while they provided the martial power and the sovereign umbrella. It really upends this modern geopolitical binary we hold in our heads about strict ethno-national borders.
It really does. And speaking of upending assumptions, we have to talk about Cairo, Egypt.
Yes, absolutely.
Because Cairo has about 660 years of Turkic-led rule. But it wasn't just the Ottomans governing a province. The sources put a massive emphasis on the Mamluk Sultanate, which governed from 1250 to 1517.
Yeah, the Mamluk era is categorized specifically as military caste rule.
Yeah.
And this is, frankly, one of the most fascinating political structures in history. The Mamluk ruling class was fundamentally a military elite made up largely of Turkic or Turkic origin slave soldiers.
So, wait, just to clarify this, enslaved soldiers essentially formed a ruling caste that governed one of the world's greatest cities for centuries.
Yeah.
How does that even work structurally?
Well, the Mamluk system effectively solved the oldest problem in politics, which is nepotism and dynastic stagnation.
Okay.
By requiring new rulers and top generals to be drawn from enslaved soldiers brought in from the outside, usually from the Eurasian steppes, they prevented local Egyptian families from monopolizing power.
Wow.
It was an extreme, ruthless, but highly effective form of military meritocracy. They became the sultans, the emirs, the ultimate administrators.
That is wild.
And even after the Ottomans finally conquered Egypt in 1517 and made it a province, the Ottomans actually kept the Mamluk elites deeply embedded in the local administration because their system of control was just too effective to dismantle.
That is an incredible insight. It wasn't just brute force. It was a highly engineered political machine. So the Ottomans have this deep, centralized bureaucratic grip. And as they expand their machine across the Bosphorus, we move into what the sources call the European anchor.
Yes. And this is where we have to look at the sheer duration of direct provincial rule. When the Ottoman Empire pushed into Europe, it wasn't a brief military occupation. It became the fundamental administrative layer of European urban history for centuries.
Let's run the numbers on some of these modern European capitals because they are mind-blowing. Athens, Greece, about 375 years of direct Ottoman rule. Sofia, Bulgaria, around 490 to 500 years. And Skopje in North Macedonia, a staggering 520 years. From 1392 all the way until the Balkan Wars in 1912.
What's fascinating here is if you think about what 520 years in Skopje actually looks like on the ground, that's longer than the entire existence of the United States, twice over.
That really puts it in perspective.
Right. That's not just holding a city. That is generations of total urban rewiring. You are building bad houses. You are introducing new Islamic legal and tax codes. You are changing the agricultural rhythms of the region to feed the imperial supply lines.
It really does put historical time into perspective.
Yeah.
And it's not just those three. Sarajevo in Bosnia and Herzegovina saw 400 to 450 years of rule, actually developing as a major Ottoman administrative seat.
Exactly.
Tirana, Albania, has about 300 years, growing specifically within the context of Ottoman Albania. Podgorica, the capital of Montenegro, experienced 404 years of direct rule after falling to the Turks in 1474. It sounds like the entire political center of gravity for southeastern Europe was intimately tied to Istanbul.
Completely. And even in cities that were heavily contested borderlands, you saw massive intervals of Turkic rule, like Belgrade in Serbia, which was fiercely fought over and changed hands constantly. But our sources still calculate about 250 net years of intermittent direct rule and Ottoman garrisons.
And then there's Budapest in Hungary. The sources are very precise here. They specify the historical predecessor Buda before it unified with Pest. Buda was the Ottoman center in central Hungary for 145 years under direct rule. Oh, and we can't forget the Mediterranean islands. Nicosia in Cyprus experienced 307 years of direct Ottoman rule starting in 1571.
So for hundreds of years, the bureaucratic language, the taxation, and the daily urban administration of these European capitals were entirely Ottoman.
Right.
But, an empire cannot stretch infinitely. using the exact same playbook. When they looked toward the Mediterranean and North Africa, the logistics of direct rule from Istanbul became impossible. They needed a totally different operational model.
Right, which brings us to the North African capitals. And the sources categorize these not under direct rule, but as a regency model.
Yes.
I was trying to wrap my head around this, and I started thinking about it like franchise locations of a massive global brand.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Right, like you have the Ottoman corporate umbrella, the branding, the ultimate geopolitical loyalty, the shared naval resources. But these specific locations are managed by highly autonomous local CEOs.
That franchise analogy works perfectly. The Ottomans realized they couldn't micromanage North Africa, so they created these regencies, managed by local CEOs who were often corsairs, janissary commanders, beys, and deys. Look at Algiers in Algeria. It operated as an Ottoman regency for about 312 to 314 years. It was managed by a janissary and corsair military administrative elite who ran their own highly lucrative maritime economy while still flying the Ottoman flag.
And Tunis in Tunisia functioned as a regency and a beylik under Ottoman suzerainty for about 307 years. Tripoli in Libya sits at about 360 years of provincial and regency rule. The sources even note a specific period called the Karamanli interlude in Tripoli. They were functionally autonomous, running their own foreign policy in the Mediterranean, but legally tied to the empire.
It was an incredibly flexible system of power. But the influence in Africa didn't just stop at the coast. You have a unique case further south, which is Khartoum, the capital of Sudan. It has about 64 years of Ottoman-linked administration.
Only 64 years compared to the others, but the origin story is wild. How does an Ottoman footprint end up all the way down in Sudan?
Well, because Khartoum actually began as an Egyptian army camp in 1821.
Ah.
And remember, Egypt at this time was under the Turco-Egyptian administration of Muhammad Ali. So the city was literally born out of this Turco-Egyptian expansionist period known as the Turkiya before it was captured during the Mahdist Revolt. The very foundation of the city is tied to a Turkic-led administrative push.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. We have spent a lot of time in the Ottoman sphere and its fringes. But the compendium explicitly told us at the start, Turkic-led does not just mean Ottoman.
Exactly.
We need to pivot entirely away from the Mediterranean and look at the massive eastern expanse.
Yes, we need to talk about the Turco-Mongol East and the Central and South Asian capitals. To understand this, we have to look at dynasties that were culturally rooted in the Central Asian, Turkic, and Timurid world, long before they ever reached India.
You were talking about the Mughals?
Exactly. The Mughals are treated in our sources as a Turco-Mongol Timurid dynasty. Their founding identity under Baburi was deeply tied to that Central Asian Turkic heritage. So when we look at New Delhi, and by extension, the older continuous Delhi urban complex, we are looking at over 500 aggregated years of Turkic and Turco-Mongol dynastic rule.
500 years. That completely shifts how we view the history of the Indian subcontinent.
It does, and that 500 years isn't just the Mughals. It includes the earlier Delhi Sultanate, which featured Mamluk or slave dynasties of Turkic origin. They established the initial administrative blueprint that the Mughals later perfected.
And that Mughal provincial power stretched all the way east to present-day Bangladesh. Dhaka served as a Mughal provincial capital for about 75 years across two different phases.
Right.
But if we trace the Mughal lineage backward, geographically, we land in Kabul, Afghanistan.
Kabul is crucial. It was seized by Babur in 1504 and served as his initial Timurid Mughal capital before he pushed into India. It remained a vital strategic base for the empire, giving it over 200 years of Turkic-led dynastic importance.
And deeper into Central Asia, we hit Tashkent in Uzbekistan, which saw several centuries of rule under the Karakhanids, the Chagatai and Timurid empires, the Shaybanids, and the Kokand Khanate.
Yep.
Or Bishkek in Kyrgyzstan, which actually grew from a fortress built by the Kokand Khanate, giving it about 37 years of direct Khanate rule before Russian expansion swallowed the region.
And we should also mention a few smaller hubs here, too, where Ottoman reach briefly extended into areas we don't typically associate with them. Doha in Qatar had an Ottoman garrison for about 42 years, and Amman, the capital of Jordan.
Wait, hold on, let me interrupt you there. Doha in Qatar.
Yeah.
I associate the Gulf with British treaties, pearl diving, or modern petrostates. I do not associate it with Ottoman garrisons. What were they even doing down there?
They were playing a massive geopolitical chess game against the British.
Oh, wow.
In the late 19th century, as the British Empire was expanding its naval dominance in the Persian Gulf, the Ottomans pushed south into Qatar and established a garrison in Doha to secure their flank and assert sovereignty.
That's fascinating.
It lasted for about 42 years. It was a strategic buffer. And similarly, with Amman, the modern iteration of the city was actually resettled by the empire. They used Ottoman Turks and Circassian refugees around 1878 to establish a loyal agricultural and administrative hub, giving it about 40 years of direct Ottoman provincial rule before the empire fell.
It is genuinely mind-bending to think about. You look at cities like New Delhi or Bishkek or Amman today, they all have completely different modern identities, different languages, different geopolitical alignments, yet they all share this underlying structural DNA of Turkic or Turco-Mongol administration.
Which leads us perfectly into our final and perhaps most nuanced category, cities that experienced indirect suzerainty or paid tribute without being directly absorbed into a Turkic-led state.
Okay, I have to push back on this concept of suzerainty for a second.
Yeah.
If a city just pays tribute to an empire, does that really count as being ruled? Is it basically just a medieval mafia protection racket, or is it actual governance?
That is the exact tension our source methodology addresses. And honestly, the mafia analogy isn't too far off for some of these relationships.
Really?
Yeah. The compendium is clear. You cannot merge these cases uncritically with direct rule. It is a different mechanism. Under suzerainty, local rulers often stayed in place. They managed their own daily affairs, their own religions, their own local laws.
Right.
But their political survival, their foreign policy, and a massive chunk of their wealth were subordinated to a Turkic-led overlord.
Which brings us to Russia and Ukraine.
Yes. Moscow experienced roughly 230 to 240 years of tribute suzerainty under the Golden Horde and its Tatar successors. And when we say Golden Horde, we aren't just talking about a roving band of warriors on horseback.
Right, it was much more structured.
Think of them as a highly organized post-Mongol tax syndicate that eventually adopted Turkic culture and Islamic law. They ran a massive protection racket across Eastern Europe.
So the Russian princes ruled Moscow locally, but they answered strictly to the Khans for their legitimacy and their wealth.
Exactly. And similarly, Kiev in Ukraine was under Golden Horde and Tatar overlordship for over 120 years. You also see suzerainty in Eastern Europe.
Okay.
Bucharest in Romania functioned for about 218 to 219 years as a Wallachian capital that was under formal Ottoman suzerainty. The local princes ruled, but they were vassals to Istanbul. Chiina in Moldova falls into a similar context of Ottoman suzerainty over Moldavia up until 1812.
Now, looking at the source table, there's a final category here, and we want to be totally transparent with you about how the data is organized,
Right.
because this next set of cities involves modern borders and capitals that are highly contested today. As we look at places like Jerusalem or Pristina, our goal isn't to weigh in on modern geopolitics or take any sides. We are just looking purely through the impartial lens of our historical data to see how the architecture of Turkic rule applied to these areas exactly as the source table categorizes it.
Right. The historical durations of rule in these cities are deeply documented, but their contested modern status is what places them in a separate methodological category in our sources. First is Jerusalem, claimed as a capital by Israel and Palestine, with its status disputed. Historically, it experienced about 667 years of combined Turkic military elite rule under the Mamluks, followed by direct Ottoman rule.
Wow, that's a long time.
It is. Then you have Ramallah, operating as a de facto administrative center for Palestine, which saw about 400 years of regional provincial administration under the Ottomans.
The sources also list Pristina, the capital of the partially recognized state of Kosovo. Pristina was under direct Ottoman rule for approximately 457 years, from 1455 to 1912.
Right.
And finally, there is North Nicosia in northern Cyprus, a de facto partially recognized state. Its historical timeline mirrors the rest of Nicosia, with 307 years of direct Ottoman rule starting in 1571.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, categorizing these rule types, direct provincial control, franchise-like regencies, military caste meritocracies, and suzerainty is essential for historical accuracy. You simply cannot compare the Golden Horde's tribute extraction in Moscow with the granular, day-to-day Ottoman urban rewiring in Sofia or the Mamluk military society in Cairo. They are entirely different expressions of power, even if they share a broad Turkic-led heritage.
We have covered a massive amount of ground today. I mean, we've gone from the Corsair regencies of Algiers to the mountain fortress of Bishkek, from the tribute paid by the princes of Moscow to the continuous 8th century legacy in Ankara.
That's quite a journey.
It really is. So what does this all mean for you? The next time you look at the news or you look at a globe, remember that the borders and the cultural identities we recognize today are really just the top layer of a very deep, very complicated historical sediment. The present is just the most recent draft of history.
And that leaves you with a fascinating question to ponder.
Ooh, I like the sound of this.
If these modern capitals, from the Balkans to South Asia, were fundamentally shaped by centuries of Turkic and Turco-Mongol administrative rule, how does that invisible architecture still subtly dictate their modern reality today?
Wow, yeah.
Even if the empires are long gone, if you look closely enough, can you still see their ghosts in these cities' modern urban planning, their bureaucratic structures, or even their culinary traditions?
That is a brilliant thought to chew on. Go look at your own city's invisible architecture. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the compendium. Keep asking questions, keep digging into your sources, and we will catch you on the next one.